Book of Leviticus. Some real spiritual feller called it the liver and onions of the Bible. You either like it or you don't. Too bad. I've been enjoying going through the book of Leviticus. It's a good book. Again, it just simply teaches how to approach God in a right manner. God gave the law, again, in three different areas. He gave the moral law, that's the 10 Commandments. That's who you are on the inside. My dad always said stealing never made anybody a thief. They steal because they are a thief. And what's on the inside works its way out. So we have the moral law. Then we had the civil law. He gave that. That's how we interact in society. Without law, we have anarchy. You've got to have law. We live in lawless days. Brother Cliff, they won't put up blinking lights for a church. They're just going to put a sign that says church and not even drop the speed limit. We're trying to get some help out here. 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, and they'll blow your doors off. And when people try to pull out of the church parking lot, they run over you, and then they blow the horn at you for going too slow. Well, I tried. They said that's a law enforcement problem, that they don't enforce law. They only do that for schools. So they don't do it for churches. But anyway, we're trying to get some signs up out here. We live in lawless days. So we have civil law. It's based on your Bible. If you go to the Supreme Court of the United States and look right up on the facade, up over the doors, you'll find Moses holding up the 2 tables of law in his hand. It's built upon the principle. Leviticus simply is saved. But you get chapter number 10, you find something here. I want to read verse number 1. I'm going to give you a little bit of backdrop on it. And Nadab and Abihu. Who are these? There are 2 of the 4 sons of Aaron. Aaron is Moses' older brother. When Moses turned 80, Aaron turned 83. Miriam was an older sister. Moses was the baby in the family. So we find here 2 sons that are mentioned. The other 2 were Eleazar and Ithamar. These 4 were successors to what's called the Aaronic priesthood. That's the line of the high priest. He set up what's called the Levitical priesthood. That's the tribe of Levi would be the priestly tribe that would take care of the work of the tabernacle, the tearing it down, the putting it up, the sacrifices, and all these things. But the Aaronic priesthood is different from the Levitical priesthood. The Aaronic priesthood is a succession of high priests. One historian said before the priesthood actually stopped in 70 AD when Titus of Rome destroyed the temple, that was Zerubbabel's temple, they said that there were probably 83 high priests. They served as long as they lived. There was no set time of service for the high priest. So Aaron was the first high priest, but his sons after him, Nadab, then Abihu, and then you had Eleazar and Ithamar. These were to succeed him when he died. They were set up. So when you get chapter number 10, you find the 2 eldest of these 4 brethren. Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer and put fire therein and put incense thereon and offered, notice the next 2 words, strange fire. They offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not, and there went out fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Now, I want to look at these 2 verses as they introduce chapter number 10. Very interesting verses. The key word in this is the word "and." If you'll know that first word, what's it doing? It's telling you that chapter 10 and chapter 9 are a continuation, 23 and 24 and preceding. But I want you to notice verse 22 of chapter number 9. And Aaron lifted up his hand toward the people and blessed them, and came down from offering of the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings, And Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the people. And there came a fire out from before the Lord, and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces and. Oh, I'm talking about just as soon as they got through. I want to look at them just for a moment. Over in the book of Exodus, chapter number 30, I want to read a couple of verses to you this morning. And when Aaron lighted the lamps at evening, he shall burn incense upon it. Now he's talking about this incense. A perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall offer no strange incense thereon. Now, he used that word strange in Exodus chapter 30 when he was telling Moses how this be done. No strange incense, nor burnt sacrifice, nor meat offering, neither shall ye pour drink offering thereon. He's talking about the word strange. When I think of the word strange in our day, when I was a boy, Dad would, he'd use a couple of words, peculiar and strange. He'd say, so-and-so, one of our neighbors, he's a little peculiar. Peculiar were able to do it. Moses gave them the instructions when they built every article of the tabernacle. They brought them to Moses one at a time for inspection to make sure they were right. Then they took a year to put that tabernacle together. Now these sacrifices, he gave them jot and tittle how to offer these sacrifices. You need to understand these sacrifices were fulfilled by Christ. We no longer offer blood sacrifices because the atonement has come. In the Old Testament, you had a system of atonement. That word atonement means to put something off or to cover something for a while. So they were putting off their sin until Christ would come and take away the sin of the world. When he died, he fulfilled all of these things. At the same time, the importance of them. How important was it that Christ died right? It was absolutely important to our salvation that he lived right. Oh, what a miracle. They stood with their face to the sea, Pharaoh's army to back, and God said, tell them to go forward. How would you like to go forward with the Atlantic Ocean standing in front of you? Now, you're talking about faith. Sometimes we get on these Old Testament people because they said, Lord, what are we going to do? I'm talking about faced with impossibility. And when God opened that Red Sea, he opened it from the other side. They were on the west side of the Red Sea. The Bible said God caused an east wind to blow all that night. And here they stand. Moses got his rod out, and that ocean's doing nothing. And when that sun came up in the morning, that thing had parted from the other. I don't even know their motivation. I got to thought about that. Was it pride? Was it ambition? Order. He used those two words because we sought it not after due order. They knew better. Now look at verse number 2. There went out fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. What did they do? Verse number 1, they offered strange fire before the Lord. Now let's take you back to what the censer is. The censer is what the high priest used. You had a lot of articles inside of the actual tabernacle itself in what's called the holy place. You had the menorah. You looking, it would be on your right side, the candlestick. On the left side, they had the table of showbread. But in the center before that veil, they had what's called the golden altar of incense. It's where the high priest morning, noon, out of that veil. That's the Ark of the Covenant where God is going to meet with the people. He said, I'll speak with you from between the cherubims. Off of that mercy seat was where God spoke to them. So they stood in His place. They had no business being there. They stood in His place and offered that incense before the Lord. And God killed them in the Now, tradition tells us, and I have no problem with this tradition, that they tied a rope around that man's waist. Because if he died unclean, all they could do was pull the rope. They could not go in there because, one, they weren't a high priest. Two, they were not offering the blood. They couldn't just go in there, all right? So they've got a thrice holy God on the other side of that veil. And they come in and offer in an unholy manner. We do know it was an unholy manner that they offered it with. Now, God killed them. Old Rodney Proctor, we was talking about him a while ago. He preached a message one time, and the title of the message was Achan sinned and God killed Achan. All right. Well, that's kind of a harsh way to put it, I guess, but it was a reality. Achan sinned. You remember when he sinned, and they had to find out he was the one that took what he wasn't supposed to take, and they took him to the valley of Achor, and there they put him to death. All right. These men sinned in the same place. The consequences. Now, let's look at verse number 3. Now, they're dead. These are Aaron's sons. And Moses said unto Aaron, can you imagine the devastation of this father to see his two sons just burnt literally up in the place where he was supposed to stand? I can't imagine the shock of that thing. The Bible said Aaron kept his mouth shut because he knew that they had transgressed against God, and this was between God and them. They knew better, but they did it anyway. And Moses called for Mishael and Elizaphan. I like these names. I'm glad I didn't name my boys that way. The sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron. Now, these were Aaron's uncle. These were old men. He told them in verse number 4, come near, carry your brethren from before the sanctuary out of the camp. So they went near and carried them in their coats out of the camp, as Moses had said. They carried these bodies away, took them outside the camp. Bible doesn't say what they did at that point in time, if they buried them or what they did. I would say they probably buried the bodies. But they took them outside of the camp, and it was a testimony. The people of Israel watched as these uncles carried these bodies out of that camp, and they took these bodies outside and disposed of them, and I'm going to say probably in a respectful manner when they took them out. But boy, not so much the death of these two young men, even though I'm sure people mourned about that. What they mourned was the kindling of the fire. That was the cause. That's what set this whole thing off. You know, when somebody dies out of the will of the Lord, it hurts us. But we all also need to mourn why they died. You know, a lot of people today, they don't get down to the root of problems, even in medicine. Well, a lot of times they treat your symptoms instead of finding the cure to what's going on, and sometimes they can't find a cure. I understand that, but they try to treat your symptoms as these symptoms come up. He said, listen, we don't want you to put a Band-Aid on this thing. We want the people to bewail the kindling of that fire. What started? What's kindling? That's what started. And don't go out. You don't take your caps off. You don't rend your clothes. You don't go outside. You've got work to do on the inside. Now, eventually they got to go back out because they didn't live in the tabernacle. But at the same time, God gave them warning. Now, verse number 8, and the Lord spake unto Aaron. Now, it's been Moses talking to Aaron, but now Aaron is the high priest. The Lord spake unto Aaron, saying, do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. And he said this, that you may put difference between holy and unholy, and between unclean. It's right. How do you know how to do something right? You've got to be taught to do that. We do a lot of things sometimes in nothing but ignorance because we haven't been taught. You know, the Bible talks about God's people being destroyed for ignorance, a lack of knowledge. God's people get knowledgeable